My name is Scott Alexander. I'm Associate Professor of Islamic Studies and Christian-Muslim Relations and Director of Catholic Muslim Studies at Catholic Theological Union in Chicago, Illinois. It's a marvelous opportunity, as so many of the conferences are organized by the Hizmet movement, to do two things. One is to bring people together of various faiths to share their experiences as Jews, Christians, Muslims, Sikhs, Buddhists, Hindus, and we have an extraordinary variety of those people here at this conference. Another is to bring people with specific academic skills who either identify with these traditions or do not, to help bring an analytic perspective on so many of the issues and challenges that we're facing in the modern world, and to talk about the various ways in which people of faith attempt to address these issues, to talk about their failures and to talk about their successes. There is no way that I can sum up in anything less than probably a 72-hour continuous feed the positive impact that the Hizmet movement has had on me over the last 10 years. I would say some of the most important things have been establishing extremely deep relationships of trust and friendship with various people in the movement in various parts of the world. Learning about the movement, therefore, through them. Learning more deeply about Islam, Islamic values and ideals through them. Learning about their encounter with the Quran, their understanding of the role of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, in history. And of course, learning about the various ways in which the Hizmet movement tries to live out and fulfill its mission all around the world. My first experience with Hizmet was when I was visited in my office by a man who was basically employing the methodology of Hizmet, which is to show up someplace with a bunch of ikhlas, with a bunch of sincerity, and maybe some meager financial resources, and try, with the grace of God and by establishing friendships with people, to make something good happen. So he came to my office in Chicago and said he wanted to have an intercultural dialogue dinner in downtown Chicago. And he asked me if I would be willing to participate. I said I'd be more than happy to participate. And he said, who else would you recommend we invite, perhaps even to speak briefly at this event? I said, well, could you please show me the list of people you've already invited? He said, you're on the list. I said, I appreciate that, thank you so much. He said, no, you're the only one on the list. So in other words, he had come to me, he had heard that maybe I would be willing to participate in this event, and maybe I'd be a halfway decent resource person to help him build this, and that's it, just with a bunch of sincerity, an open heart, and reaching out to me in a very relaxed and non-threatening way to ask if I would be interested in participating and helping him build the event. I didn't do any of the heavy lifting. You know, all the people in Hizmet did the heavy lifting. I just wrote down a bunch of names and told a number of colleagues that this gentleman would be calling them. 3 weeks later, Niagara Educational Services, which it was known at the time, managed to pull off, through the grace of God and all this ikhlas, this wonderful event in downtown Chicago. At the time, it was a relatively unknown quantity in the vigorous and rich interfaith life of the greater Chicago area. And within 3, max 4 years, no one could imagine a vibrant, robust interfaith community in Chicago without the presence of what then became known as the Niagara Foundation. I think the Atlantic Institute, like so many other Hizmet organizations in the United States, Pacifica, Rumi Forum, the Niagara Foundation, of which I sit on the board, just exemplify so many of the values of Hizmet. In two ways. I mean, they try to remain faithful to the teachings of Fethullah Gulen, particularly dialogue and education. And again, that's one of the things that's happening at this Peace Builders Conference. Dialogue between people of different faiths, but in an educational context where we can enrich each other, not just spiritually, but also intellectually. And Atlantic Institute does that through a number of its initiatives. But Atlantic Institute, also meets the challenge that every other HizMet organization has to meet, and that is the challenge of what I call enculturation. Atlantic Institute is southeast. It's headquartered here in Atlanta, in Georgia, and the folks at Atlantic Institute do a very good job of figuring out what the needs of this community are, the way it can be most effective in this community. That can be similar in some ways to what Pacifica is doing in California or Niagara is doing in the upper Midwest, but different in some ways too. And I'm always impressed by the ways in which all the various HizMet organizations, but particularly Atlantic Institute, is attentive to the special circumstances of its own context.